Okay, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to unravel the massive web of alliances that somehow turned a single isolated assassination into an unprecedented global gridlock. I mean, we are looking at a conflict so overwhelmingly massive, people back then just called it the Great War. It completely rewired the 20th century, and really understanding exactly how it unfolded is absolutely essential. To wrap our heads around this giant puzzle, we'll walk through 5 logical phases: sparks and secret alliances, the trench warfare deadlock, expanding the global conflict, the turning tides, and finally, a bitter peace. Let's get into it.
Section 1. Sparks and Secret Alliances.
So picture the early 1900s. The map of Europe looked completely different than it does today. It was dominated by these massive, fiercely competitive empires: the British, French, Russian, Austro-Hungarian, and German. And they were all aggressively pushing their influence into places like Africa and India. To protect themselves, these competing empires formed strict mutual defense pacts. This effectively bound them together into 2 massive opposing factions, the Central Powers on one side and the Allied powers on the other. It was, literally, a giant powder keg just waiting for a spark.
And here is where the domino effect kicks into high gear. In 1914, a Serbian nationalist assassinated the Austro-Hungarian heir, Archduke Franz Ferdinand. In response, Germany basically offered a blank check of military support to Austria-Hungary. That single fateful decision pulled the entire continent into war in a matter of weeks, because one nation after another had to honor those secret alliances we just talked about. Now, Germany desperately wanted to avoid fighting a 2-front war against both France and Russia at the exact same time. So they rapidly launched what was known as the Schlieffen Plan. The logic was pretty ruthless: invade and devastate neutral Belgium to outflank the French, secure a lightning-fast victory in the West, and then pivot all their forces east to face Russia. But this aggressive push was unexpectedly stopped cold by British and French forces at the Battle of the Marne in September 1914.
Section 2. The Trench Warfare Deadlock.
With that initial, rapid movement completely halted, both armies engaged in a frantic race to the sea, repeatedly trying to outflank each other until they literally ran out of land. And this forced them into what became the defining nightmare of the conflict: trench warfare. Forget the glorious cavalry charges of the 19th century. This was a brutal, muddy reality. Soldiers lived entirely in deep, waterlogged ditches carved out of the earth. The physical hardships were just unimaginable. Imagine spending your days and nights battling not just enemy artillery, but horrifying afflictions like trench foot, rampant disease, rotting smells everywhere, and absolutely relentless rat infestations. It was a devastating operational stalemate. And these interconnected ditches weren't just small, temporary outposts. They formed a continuous, unbroken, scarred line stretching over 300 kilometers, running all the way from the North Sea straight down to the Swiss border. It was just a massive, immovable scar physically ripped across the continent of Europe. Now, think about this. Soldiers sat in these grueling, horrific conditions for roughly 3.5 years. 3.5 years. They lived shoulder to shoulder, trying to survive in the freezing mud under the constant, deafening roar of millions of incoming artillery shells. The psychological and physical toll was immense, while desperate commanders repeatedly tried and failed to break the deadlock. The human cost of trying to breach these heavily fortified trenches was simply staggering. You had massive, months-long offensives, like the Battle of Verdun, which resulted in over 1 million casualties. Meanwhile, a British attempt to bypass the trenches and open a totally new front against the Ottoman Empire at Gallipoli ended in disaster, yielding practically zero strategic gain despite 250,000 casualties. Literally millions of lives were lost just to gain mere meters of mud.
Section 3. Expanding the global conflict.
Desperate to bypass that immovable Western Front, these empires desperately expanded the conflict, searching for any possible advantage anywhere on the map. This quickly became a truly global war. On the Eastern Front, combat was vast and incredibly fast-moving between Germany and Russia. High up in the Alps, Italian and Austro-Hungarian troops fought bitter, freezing altitude battles. Down in Africa, German General Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck utilized masterful guerrilla tactics against Allied colonies. And over in the Pacific, Japan eagerly seized German-held territories to expand its own empire. Concurrently, rapid technological innovations were fundamentally transforming the battlefield. We saw a massive shift toward a deadly modern reliance on British naval blockades, designed specifically to starve the enemy out. To counter that, Germany unleashed unrestricted submarine warfare, using their terrifying new U-boats. And up in the sky, airplanes evolved incredibly fast. They went from being mere observation tools, where early pilots literally just threw bricks or hand grenades at each other, to highly deadly weapons equipped with synchronized machine guns.
Section 4. The turning tides.
By 1917, massive internal pressures and new provocations fundamentally altered the balance of power. The deadlock was finally cracking. Over in Russia, the people were starving and completely exhausted by the relentless demands of the Eastern Front. This triggered a massive internal revolution. Tsar Nicholas II was overthrown, Vladimir Lenin came to power, and his new government quickly signed a peace treaty, making massive territorial concessions to Germany and exiting the war entirely. For a brief, terrifying moment for the Allies, it looked like Germany might actually pull off a win.
But Germany overplayed its hand. Their brutal, unrestricted U-boat attacks on ships, most famously the passenger liner RMS Lusitania, had completely outraged the American public. Combine that with the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, which was this wild, secret proposal from Germany to ally with Mexico against America, and it was the final straw. The previously neutral United States finally declared war in April 1917.
Knowing fresh American troops were flooding in, Germany realized their window for victory was rapidly closing. So they launched one massive, desperate spring offensive in 1918 to finally break the trenches and take Paris. But it failed. The German military was totally exhausted. This opened the door for an overwhelming Allied counterattack known as the 100 Days Offensive, which pushed German forces right to the absolute brink of total collapse.
Section 5. A bitter peace.
Facing total military collapse, completely depleted resources, and massive internal rebellions back home, the Central Powers had no choice left. They had to seek an end to the horrific bloodshed. So, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month in 1918, an armistice was signed. After 4 years of continuous, devastating combat, the guns on the Western Front finally fell silent. The physical fighting was over, but the political maneuvering, well, that was just beginning. The victorious Allied forces designed the 1919 Treaty of Versailles to severely punish Germany. It forced Germany to accept the entire blame for the war, imposed crippling economic reparations, and deliberately excluded them from the newly formed League of Nations, an organization ironically meant to prevent future conflicts. But here's the dangerous part. Because the German homeland hadn't actually been invaded by enemy troops, average German citizens and wounded soldiers, including a young, recovering Adolf Hitler, were absolutely shocked by the sudden surrender. This widespread shock fueled a highly toxic narrative known as the stab-in-the-back myth, a lingering, dangerous political lie that their leaders had cowardly betrayed an undefeated army.
Which leaves us with this final, vital question to consider. Did the crushing, humiliating terms of peace at the end of this devastating gridlock actually make the outbreak of the Second World War entirely inevitable? Take a moment to think about how the very treaty